What's going on, boys and girls? Let's talk perfect arrow setup. The perfect arrow setup is going to be different for everybody. No matter what setup you got, you're going to have different things that you're going to be hunting. You're going to have different needs, whether you're a tournament archer, whether you're hunting elk, whether you're hunting hogs, white-tailed deer, squirrels, shooting pigeons out of the air. I don't know what you're into. But there's a perfect arrow out there for every application. This is my whitetail setup right here. I take that back. This is my, I can shoot everything with this and kill it setup. Pretty much. Just short of some crazy wild stuff like Cape Buffalo. I might go a little heavier. But I'll take you through what this arrow is. And then I'll give you a little bit of insight into some of my philosophy on why I build this particular arrow. T-Bone and I, not to name drop, but there it is. Mr. Travis Turner and I got on the phone several years ago, two, 3 years ago, and started talking about what's the perfect arrow for a given setup. And both of us shoot pretty much identical, close to identical setups as far as we both shoot a Hoyt bow, we both shoot 70 pounds. I also shoot an 80-pound setup. That's kind of another conversation. You can start playing around with it, getting a little heavier if you're shooting a little heavier setup. But we started discussing the importance of light giving you a flatter trajectory versus heavy giving you more penetration, kinetic energy, that sort of thing. You start putting lighted nocks on it. That's another factor. You start playing around with FOC. Look, here's the quick and dirty on FOC is there's been guys that have very low FOC that are killing the heck out of stuff because they're really good shots, and there's guys with super duper high FOC and very heavy arrows that are killing the heck out of stuff because they know their equipment. Basically, archery is a trade-off. It's a compromise. If you have a heavier setup, a lot of weight forward, you're going to get more FOC. There's two schools of thought, and just like most things, the truth lies, in my opinion, somewhere in the middle. So you start off with an arrow build. And T-Bone's talked about it. He's done videos on this, and him and I have discussed it, at length on the importances and the trade-offs and the different things that you can do with an arrow build. But you think about it like throwing a brick versus a ping pong ball. Would you rather get hit with a brick going 35 miles an hour? Or would you rather get hit with a ping pong ball going 100 miles an hour? I'm picking the ping pong ball every time. So kinetic energy, weight, there's something to be said for that. But if you can't hit it and you can't be in a dynamic situation where you're guessing range in the field and possibly getting the range wrong by a couple yards and still hit your target, you're still out of the game as much, as if you went the other way. Now, my opinion, like I said, you want to have the flattest shooting arrow possible while still giving yourself that impact, that punch, that kinetic energy, the devastating penetration that comes from a heavier arrow with great FOC. So, I think it's a compromise. Now, anything really above 5 to 7% FOC, you're killing white-tailed deer all day long with it. In my opinion. This particular arrow, I'll just run you through the setup, and I did another quick and dirty arrow setup video, but I'll take you through it real quick on the end here, and I'll switch broadheads out. G5 has an amazing line of broadheads. That's why I chose them to be our broadhead of choice. But this is the Megameat. This is the perfect whitetail broadhead, in my opinion. Incredibly devastating, awesome penetration, gigantic wound channel. 100 grain broadhead. I got 105 grains of insert and an outsert collar. Then I'm shooting the RIP TKO from Victory. These are for my 70-pound setup, so it is 300 spine. I've got the best vanes out there, and Levi Morgan came out with these vanes, the TAC Vanes. Got a little wrap on there. And one of the most important things that I think is seeing where your arrow impacts in all scenarios. Plus, it looks really cool on video for us. I've got the Nock from Lumenok. Now, when you're playing around with FOC and getting your arrow set up, obviously I'm starting out with a little bit of a deficit of 23 grains on the back end of the arrow. So in order to have my forward of center weight work out, I'm going to need to put a little extra weight in the front. This arrow totals, and it's a little heavy for some people, but this arrow totals 492 grains. All right, so when I balanced it out and did all the math, it gave me about, I think it was 16.7% FOC, which in my opinion is phenomenal. It's all the FOC you need. This thing is a TAC driver. It's out of a tuned bow. This thing is absolutely incredible. And I think a lot of the guys, I might step on some toes here, but a lot of the guys on the heavy is the only way to go. Let's shoot rebar out of our bows. That's the most effective way to kill animals. A lot of those guys just can't tune a bow, honestly. They can't tune a bow, so they go heavy, gigantic FOC. I'm shooting 600 grain arrows like I can blow through a refrigerator. Great, dude. But if you misjudge the distance, so if you misjudge something and think, well, man, that's 32 yards, and it really turns out to be 36 yards, you're missing by this much. So there's a give and take. Like I said, the truth is somewhere in the middle. There's these super crazy, make your arrow as light as you possibly can, screw FOC guys. And then there's make your arrow as heavy as you possibly can. You have to have gigantic, forward of center weight distribution. The truth is somewhere in the middle. I feel like I'm on the heavy side of the middle. I could probably lighten this arrow up and get flatter trajectories, still kill, moderate size hogs and any kind of white-tailed deer I want to with this thing with the right broadhead on it. And honestly, kill elk and whatever else. I mean, there's been elk and hogs and deer killed with much lighter arrows than this one. This just happens to be the trajectory that I'm comfortable with. I feel like even if I'm off by a few yards, a couple yards here and there, I can still hit what I'm aiming at with this arrow, and it's still got a ton of kinetic energy. It's still going to blow through the animal. That's just where my philosophy lands. Is like I said, somewhere in the middle. An incredibly effective arrow. I've proven it. Every time we kill an animal, I do a full autopsy. I see what vital organs I hit, what bone I might have come in contact with, what the angle of it was. And that's what we all need to do as archers, is be students of the game. You can't just shoot it and go, oh, we found it, so everything's cool. No. You need to dig in there and look and see what that arrow did, how it performed, how it could have done better. If you video like we do, look at the playback. Did the arrow deflect at all? Did you get a little tail waggle when it was going in there? And then you can assess and change things up. I've been doing that for years, assessing the performance in dynamic situations of different broadheads. And, I landed on G5 with zero incentive. I was gonna find the best broadhead. I didn't care if somebody sponsored me or not, and that's the one I was gonna buy. And that's how I came across G5. Their line of broadheads is incredible if you want to switch it up to a fixed blade if you're going after hog or whatever. But as far as like elk, white-tailed deer, anything like that, the Deadmeat and even the Megameat have just been phenomenal. Performed in the field in ways that I can't even describe. Just bone breaking, just incredible wound channels and blood trails. This is the perfect arrow for me and my setup. The thing that you need to do is find the perfect arrow for your setup. I've got an 80-pound bow where I can play around with the weight a little bit. And honestly, I carry I'll label all my arrows. All of them. This one's not labeled, but like this one right here, I got the percentage of FOC and the arrow, the grain right there on the fletchings. This one's 492. It's another one of my arrows. So I honestly have some designated marks. If I want a 600 grain arrow and a 400-pound hog comes out with a shield this thick, I've got a 600 grain arrow in there that I know where that joker's hitting, 30, 20, 30, and 40 yards, where I can pull out a fixed blade, and I've got my bow dialed to where I can get it to hit exactly the same spot as some of these lighter arrows. But you can play around with setup, and obviously more weight, more FOC, more penetration. You also have to be able to hit your target, ladies and gentlemen. You got to be able to, in a dynamic situation, guess the distance and have a little bit of a little bit of, forgivability there. You got to have some forgiveness in your arrow flight. Perfect example, a couple years ago, I was shooting, I kind of got indoctrinated into the let's all shoot rebar cult in the heavier side of that, and like mega heavy FOC and all that jazz. I kind of got sucked into it for a minute, and I started shooting these 530, 550 grain arrows. It was just more than you ever need to kill a whitetail deer. And I guessed a deer at, I believe it was 32 yards, but by the time it meandered and did some feeding, it got out to about 36. The deer committed suicide, so it ended up good in the end because the deer ducked to clear like 18 inches before the arrow even got there and killed itself. But I would have missed it by almost a foot, just based on the setup that I had, the bow I was shooting, and the fact that the arrow was literally the weight of a good piece of rebar. Now, when it hit it, it was great. It was devastating. But if the animal hadn't have ducked, if I hadn't have been hunting in Oklahoma where the deer are like water bugs and they're jumping around all the time, I would have clean missed that animal. So that's something to consider, man. Archery is a game of give and take. You can't take something from one end and expect it to just stay the same across the board. So for your individual setup, I highly recommend just playing around with it. Get a bunch of arrows, spend the extra money to get a handful of arrows, and make the first 3 all different weights. See which one's accurate, which one you can hit the target with every time. Guess some unknown distances. Do some penetration tests. Do it for yourself. I've done it. So I'm telling you, from my standpoint, this is the perfect arrow out of my 70-pound Hoyt bow. 492 grains with 16% FOC. Little on the heavier end for some of you guys. And I could lighten this arrow up, and I may play with another arrow setup that's a little bit lighter than this with less FOC. But the point is, y'all, much lighter arrows in the right hands, in the right archer, in the right setup, kill the heck out of deer. I know for a fact Levi Morgan shoots a lighter arrow setup than I do. Of course, he's the best archer probably to ever live, arguably. So if you put it where you want it, you can kill the heck out of stuff with much lighter. But like I said, it's a game of compromise in archery.